Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to be giving my final review of Arcane Act 3, but also the show as a whole, and kind of give my initial thoughts on how the show has been handled, and especially how it ended. So this is going to be a very spoilerific conversation here, so if you guys are trying to avoid spoilers in order to watch the show, go do that before you watch this video, because otherwise you are going to be spoiled about the very end of this of the show. Also, this is obviously an extra special bonus video because of the end of Arcane, so if you guys are wondering why are you uploading on Saturday, that's why. So let's go ahead and hop into this, right? I say end of Arcane very loosely and with the largest pair of air quotes I can find, because the show did not end. Quite frankly, it didn't. And I think the writers did this in about as bad of a way as you possibly can do it, right? Because they tried to end on a cliffhanger for an obvious setup for Season 2. That I don't think is necessarily a problem, but I think the problem comes with the fact that the show felt like it had another episode to go, because it didn't feel like it was ending right up until it ended, right? Like, the whole time you're watching that last scene, you're like, okay, cool, I guess we're going to see how this shakes up, and then the credits roll, and it's like, what? You can't end there, because there's so many other things that you still have to resolve. Now, I think I'm okay with a cliffhanger ending because it does at least help resolve Jinx's arc, and as one of the major characters that feels fine, but there's so much other stuff going on that it feels like content was deliberately cut from this season of Arcane to not only have a very neat and tidy 3-episode, 3-act structure, but also to set up for a Season 2. And honestly, if we get a Season 2 announced anytime in the next 6 months, I will say that I will be really, really angry about it, because it means that content was cut from this season of Arcane to sell us a Season 2, which is just, it happened at the expense of the quality of this season, which is just not, I don't think it's acceptable for them to do this. I don't mind that they planned for a Season 2, but I think that Season 1 needed to actually resolve in a satisfying manner. And again, that doesn't preclude a cliffhanger ending, but it means that all of the other plot threads you were working on needed to have been tied off first. For example, Victor has the whole conversation about the Hex Core, you have to destroy it, I can't do that, and it's sort of framed as this is something that we're going to be tackling maybe in the next episode, or maybe later in this episode, but obviously there are no next episodes, and it wasn't handled in that episode, so why then bring that up, right? Like, Victor's arc is unresolved, you never got to that point where you are dealing with that. And there are a couple other characterization arcs that just are not quite concluded. Vi, for example, her character is still developing. She's not at the point yet where we'll recognize her as the League of Legends Vi, where she is an enforcer and she sees the need for sort of a balance between Piltover and Zaun, where she knows she can fight against the corruption in Zaun, but also she's not quite Piltovan, right? We don't quite get there. She obviously does the operation with Jace, where she does fight against Silco, but she doesn't feel a need to be doing that for everybody yet, right? And I think that, again, is characterization that isn't quite resolved. And even the scene that the writers apparently thought was the culmination of Vi's entire character arc, where she goes and fights Silco's henchwoman in the bar, right, where Vi has her gauntlets and this henchwoman has her upgraded armor or whatever, right? Like, that whole scene is shot as if this is the culmination of Vi's character, but no, nothing was culminated, nothing was concluded. You're just having two augmented individuals fight each other in the bar. Like, Vander even came back from the dead to be like, oh hey Vi, you're doing good, kid, go for it. Like, I don't understand what the point of that scene was, because it doesn't resolve Vi's arc, but it was shot like it was somehow showing us how far Vi had come as a character. But it didn't do any of that, right? So it was like the showrunners just threw it in because they knew they needed a scene like this, like a climax for Vi, but it doesn't actually climax for Vi. There was no point to the scene at all. And it's like this with a bunch of different characters, where they start developing things and then it just kind of ends. And we're left to be like, there needs to be one more episode. Like, there absolutely has to have been at least one more episode for all of this stuff to have been resolved. And I think part of the problem I have as well is that some of the development on characters that they had is left in a really bad spot because of this. And I know I was kind of talking about this already, but like Victor, for example, he just got done so dirty in this show. Like, I feel like the writers, they didn't want to write him as a villain, as well they shouldn't have. Victor has never been a true villain, but also they didn't know how to write him as a gray character, which he is in the canon, so they just kind of didn't do anything with him as a character. They ruined his agency, they ruined his character, and his arc is like Victor coming to the same conclusion as Jace, which is we lost our way, but that's not Victor, right? Victor in the lore went full bore down the path of becoming becoming a machine is the solution to mankind's problems. Like, he never once has a second thought about that, right? Victor's like, no, clearly the best solution is to replace all my limbs with mechanical components. How does that make sense then with the arc you gave Victor in the show, right? Like, it doesn't. It's completely opposed to what Victor actually does in the lore, and it just doesn't make any sense in that regard. Mel Medarda, she's another character that I will say at the very least does get some degree of development in this part, right? She has all the conversations with her mom. We kind of understand Mel a little bit better as a character, but I still don't feel like she's much of a character, and that characterization comes way too late for me. Like, by the time we finally get the context of her mom's pressure and her upbringing in terms of how this relates to her character, it's too late for us to actually see her development. She still comes across as a character who just pushes Jace to do the things he has to do, and still comes across with very little agency on her own. It's her entire plot arc is just her telling people what she wants to do, and then telling Jace what he should do, as opposed to her doing anything on herself. And for that matter, the mom arc is just, like, bizarre. Why introduce that potential plot point with her brother this late in the season? Why introduce the Noxians at all in this part? Like, in the last 3 episodes of the show, you're going to throw in this subplot that doesn't even have a chance to get started, let alone conclude. There was no reason at all for the writers to do this in any way, shape, or form. And if you were going to do this arc, it should have waited until the next part, but then you're suffering with a character that doesn't do anything this part and doesn't have any characterization. So it just doesn't work for me at all. And there's a lot of very small bits as well. I think Echo, for example, Echo and Singed are 2 characters that are named characters, but end up feeling very peripheral to the story. And if they'd have made them, like, if you didn't play League of Legends, right, and you had no knowledge that Echo and Singed were champions in the game, then you would honestly be wondering why these 2 characters are getting so much screen time. Like, that's how I feel about Echo's inclusion in this part, is you'd be like, why, if Echo wasn't Echo, you'd be like, why is he here? Why does this character keep coming up? Like, he's a Firelight leader, sure, but I don't know why he's relevant to the story that's being told or to the plot. Which I think is a problem, and it's kind of a waste of the character, right? Because Echo doesn't do anything or really evolve that much or really contribute that much to the plot, he's just kind of hanging around being a peripheral character, which is kind of sad for Echo and kind of sad for Echo fans because he doesn't do that much. And Singed is in the same boat, but he's basically a non-character. And I really feel like the problem I have with Singed is that he could have taken Silco's shoes as the major villain of the story, and nothing would change, almost. Like, especially given that Silco, basically everything Silco does, Singed does for him, right? Singed invented Shimmer, which is how Silco makes his push for power. He essentially created Jinx in the form we recognize her, because before her Shimmer treatments, she was significantly more sane. He heavily influenced Victor's development as a character and set him on the path of the Machine Herald. Like, why wasn't Singed more of a character? He's such a major player, but it feels like the only way you would know he's a champion is if you play League of Legends. If you're just watching the show, you're just like, who is this guy and why does he keep being involved in everything? I don't understand why he keeps showing up. And again, the only reason you would know that he's important is because you played League of Legends before and know he's a champion. I will say at the very least, the Warwick teaser at the end is a nice touch. It's another hint at Season 2. I don't think it necessarily confirms the Vander's Warwick theory, but it's not a bad indicator that the theory might be accurate because you're going to be trying to tie that back into early in the show. But like Singed, I really feel like you could have written him into the role of Silco. And again, basically nothing was going to have changed about the way the plot worked because he could have done everything that Silco does. And speaking of Silco, I actually do think he is one of the best written characters in the show, which is kind of funny given that he's not even a champion, and maybe that's not something that people are actually looking for. But at the very least, Silco arcs, right? Silco tries to take over for Vander because he's like, Vander, you've gone soft and you can't do this job right, and I'm going to kill you and try to set myself up as Kingpin and do this better. But Silco then ends up in the exact same shoes as Vander, where there are people knocking on his door asking about his daughter, and he has to protect her the best he can. And he realizes towards the very end, right, that this shit is harder than it looks, that Vander had a way about himself that made it so much easier, and even though Silco has done his best, he hasn't quite gotten there. And for Silco, it's even harder because he can't be the sacrifice that Vander was attempting to be, right? Like Jay says, I can't make a deal with a snake and then cut off its head. You can't sacrifice yourself. You have to give me Jinx. And that, I think, was a really interesting comparison between the two, showing that Silco was able to push harder than Vander for what he wanted, but he wasn't able to get there at the end. And he makes the same choice as Vander, which is everything else will burn before I give up my daughter. So I think he's a really fun character arc, and he sacrifices everything he's ever worked for in order to protect his daughter, and then eventually gets killed by her as Jinx sort of decides, I don't care about anyone else, I'm going to go full bore for me. The only thing people have ever tried to do is influence me, or corrupt me, or exploit me, and I'm finally going to do the thing that I want to do, which is essentially commit to the path of chaos and just blow up the academy because screw these guys, I'm doing what I want to do, right? Like, that at the very least is the conclusion of Jinx's arc, finally coming out of this period of confusion and not knowing who to trust or what to do, and finally saying, you know what, screw it. I'm just going to go completely off the deep end because going crazy makes more sense than trying to figure out who's actually on my side and who's just saying what I want to hear. So Jinx, like I said, has a really, really good character arc as well. I like where she concluded, and I do feel like her character will diminish in priority as we continue telling the story of Arcane, and other characters, especially Caitlyn, for example, and Vi, I think would take center stage on a potential Arcane Season 2. And finally, I think we can't end without talking about Jace, as he is one of the biggest characters, and I kind of liked what Riot were doing with him, but even Jace never ended up where I wanted him to be. He was just Mr. Large and in charge the whole time, who also knew nothing about what he wanted to do or what he should do. He just does whatever the currently on-screen characters are telling him to do. Like, it feels like he just kind of hangs around until someone shows up and says, hey, Jace, do this, and then he goes and does that, and then has some thoughts about it, and then does nothing on his own afterwards until someone else comes and tells him what to do. Then I really feel like what should have happened is Jace should have still had everyone telling him what to do, but for him to proceed based on what he feels is right, even if he makes mistake after mistake, because that feels closer to the Jace I would know from League of Legends, right? A very arrogant, I know best character, and who plows ahead with what he feels is right, regardless of what his actual actions are showing him. That would have been more interesting than the arc they had for Jace, where he just kind of hangs around and doesn't do that much until someone tells him to do something, and then that's the thing he does. And finally, I do want to talk a little bit about Caitlyn. I was kind of digging her character. She was making an effort to understand where Vi is coming from, but there are just some things that they will never see eye to eye on. I think that's a good way for their relationship to kind of continue, with both of these two sort of trying to extend all the branches to each other, but also finding difficulties with just the values that they both have. I do feel like it's cliche that she got used as the damsel in distress for one of the main characters, but at the very least it was for Vi, so you are still basically saying, yeah, these two are in a relationship with each other, even though they didn't end up doing much with it. I do feel like there was enough there for you to see, unless you really had blinders on, that yes, these two have a thing going for each other. I do feel like the sort of quote-unquote breakup scene that happens in the rain towards the end, I don't quite know that I liked that so much. Again, it's the kind of thing where if you had one more episode, you could have resolved it and gotten the two back together, but as it was, it just kind of, again, it's one of those things that because you decided to end the show early, you aren't going to be able to resolve that. So in general, I liked Arcane, and I don't want to say I didn't like Arcane. I think it's an entertaining show to watch, but it progressively makes more and bigger mistakes until it eventually drops the ball with the finale. I'm not satisfied at all with how it ends. I'm just annoyed and frustrated. And like, I expected to like parts 1 and 2 less than part 1, since part 1 is about establishing a lot of the characters and a lot of the world, but like, this is far and away more than I thought I'd dislike. So this is not to say that Arcane is a bad show, but again, I just feel like there's a lot about it that could have been better, and a lot about it that I feel like the showrunners just did not do very well. So, but you'll have to let me know what you guys think of the finale of Arcane and the show as a whole down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts, especially if you thought that the showrunners did really well, or you liked the sort of inconclusive ending. Let me know all that down in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave it a like, and if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I'll upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all later.